Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some beads of friendship cards. I'm using this beautiful new collection from Spellbinders. This is the Heart Hands die set. Then we also have the Bestie Alphabet Beads press plate and die set. This has two different press plates in there as well as a die to cut them all out and create beads. And then our Bestie Beaded bracelets die set. This has two little bracelet chains as well as some different shaped dies that you can make a bunch of beads out of. But the cool thing with that is you could also use them for confetti, for shaker cards, and I'm going to be doing that later. Then we have our Bestie Sentiment press plate and die set, and once again, a bunch of great sentiments in there, and I love that you can do all the sentiments at once and then die cut them out at once. And then lastly, we have a clear stamp set that has the same sentiments as the press plate set, as well as a bead stamp, and then there's a die to cut them out. But the nice thing is you have the option, if you don't have a BetterPress, you can get the clear stamp set and have the same sentiments. So I love that fact. So I'm going to start out by creating some beads with the Bestie Alphabet bead set. I'm going to do it in several different cardstock colors. This one here is Waterfall, and I'm going to do both press plates at once. Each one does multiples of different letters, but you do need both plates to do the entire alphabet, as well as some numbers and then just some different symbols. So there's a heart symbol, a star symbol, and a little happy face. So you can get a bit of variety in here. And I'm going to do several different cardstock colors, like I said, all at once, and then I'm just going to cut them out all at once. I'll have little piles of my little beads, and that way I can, or my little circles to create beads, and that way I can have them all done and just pick and choose which letters I want as I go. I'm going to have a ton of leftovers, and I'm just going to store them in some small Ziploc bags that I get from the dollar store. Keep them with that press plate set, so next time I go to use it, I have some beads already done if I want them in those colors. So I did most of that pressing off screen because it's very repetitive, and then I'm taking the die set and I'm going to die cut. I do like to use some Best Ever craft tape to tape that die in place and make sure it's not going to shift on me, and then I will run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. And this as well gets fairly repetitive because it's doing the same thing over and over again, but it's always nice to have these things already ready to go and just easy to pick them out as I'm creating. I always love to have as much as possible ready ahead of time. These are very easy to get out of the die. You can see I just smacked it a couple times on my work surface to get most of them out, and then I just used a die pick to pick the rest of them out. Then I will place them to the side and die cut the other side of it. So I only did one impression of each one of the plates from this set for this video. Obviously you could do more than that if you wanted, but I knew I wasn't going to need more than that for what I was wanting to create. But again, I love the fact that it creates multiples. So if you have a word or a name or something that you want to create with multiples of the same letter, you can likely do it with one pressing. Once I had all of my beads done and ready to go, I was ready to start creating my background for my card. So I am using some BetterPress cardstock. I'm using just the little black BetterPress ink pad that comes with it. And I'm using the Winter Rose background press plate, and I'm also going to use the stencil. The thing I'm going to do a little bit different for this one is I'm only going to ink up one cluster of roses, and then I'm going to use the layering stencil and really only two of the different layers, and I'm only going to color that section. Now, ideally, I would have liked to have picked a background that had a cluster kind of in the center of the card, but I couldn't find, on this background, there was no cluster that was in the center of the card, and I couldn't find any of my other press plates, something that had an image that I really liked that was kind of in the center. Most of them, the floral backgrounds especially, kind of are to the left or the right. There's not a whole lot in the center, but it's going to work for what I want it to do. Now, this cluster of roses is a trio, really, and it kind of worked perfectly for the idea that I wanted. Again, ideally, I would have liked it to be in the center of the card, but that's okay. By the time we get to the end of it, I like the way that it turned out, and I think it's a little bit more interesting by being off to the side. Normally I do my layering stenciling on my sticky mat, but because I only was going to do 2 layers and they're very, very simple, I figured I might as well just do them on my glass surface. So I did use some more Best Ever Craft tape and just taped my paper down. I started taping the stencil down with that, but then I figured I might as well grab some of my painter's tape just so that it would be down a little bit more securely. Those pieces of Best Ever Craft tape are ones that I've used a couple times, so it wasn't fresh tape that had a lot of stick to it. I'm just using some very simple ink blending here. This one is Kitsch Flamingo, and I have a large Spellbinders ink blending tool that I'm using with it. And then I'm bringing in some saltwater taffy just for a little bit of more of a peachy color. I'm trying to match the color of the cardstock that I die cut, and neither one of these matches it quite exactly. So I like to kind of use a combination of the two to get a closer match to that color. So I did a little bit of each one of those colors. I think it looks a little bit more interesting with a couple colors as well. And I used that painter's tape to mask off a couple areas from the stencil that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to accidentally get my brush into in stencil. That's the easiest way to do it rather than being super careful while you're stenciling. If you tape it off, you know that you can't get ink in that area. For the greenery behind the flowers, I'm using some Salvage Patina. It's just a nice light aqua color that matches the cardstock colors that I'm using. And there's not a whole lot of it, but I did want to have that, the areas that had it, I wanted it to be, to match. So for the hands here, there's 2 different hands dies in the set. One is a shadow and one is the the part that I have cut in Barely Peach. So I am using black for the shadow. You could, if you wanted, use color that kind of matches the skin tone that you're wanting. I wanted it to be a really striking outline to it, so I chose to use the black for it. But again, you can choose whichever one you want. And I'm not sure if I actually said this, but there is another hands die that you can also use with it. It's within this collection. I don't have it, so I really liked this heart hands one, and I just wanted to create with that one. One of the pieces on each of the hands is the little pinky there, and it is a separate piece. I found the easiest way to put it down was to put a little bit of glue on the black shadow and then use my jewel picker to pick it up and place it. When you cut that shadow, it cuts out an outline showing you exactly where the layers on top goes, which makes it really, really easy to add them to that shadow there. My mat here, I'm using some Dahlia cardstock, and I cut that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And my BetterPress rose background, I cut that down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So I have some larger mats around this card. I wanted to cut down more of my background piece so that that cluster of roses was a little bit more towards the center, and I think that worked better. And it works better for the hand placement as well. I'm going to do a custom sentiment here, and I'm going to use the Bestie Beaded bracelets for that. I have cut 2 of them out, and I cut them out of some pearl finished gold cardstock from the Treasured Gold cardstock pack. I'm going to do all gold accents with these cards that I'm doing, and I'm using several of the different gold cardstocks from that pack. I love having the choice of different finishes, as well as the fact that I find that the cardstocks go a long way. I've been using them for several months, and I haven't been skimping out on using them, and I still have a ton of the cardstocks in there, so I love them. So once I've glued my hands in place, I just put an acrylic block over top of there to hold it down while I'm gluing another piece in place. And I'm using Barely Art glue with a fine line bottle. It makes it perfect for gluing just the finest or the tiniest little bits of die cut or some larger die cuts. So I want to create a custom sentiment. Like I said, I'm going to do Live Life in Color. I thought it kind of suited having a background that was pressed but only a section colored, and then those heart hands around there. What I'm going to do to start is I'm starting with the top part of the sentiment, so that will say Live Life, and because each one of those words has 4 letters, I just found the center point, put a spacer bead, and that one I've got die cut out of some brushed gold cardstock from that Treasured Gold cardstock pack. I did it with the heart shape. Again, this set has a bunch of different shapes that you can choose from to create beads out of. So there's circles, there's squares, there's hearts, there's butterflies, stars, ovals, flowers, kind of like a diamond-ish shape. So there's a lot of choice in here, and I love the fact that there's so many different choices. And like I said, this is the one that I think if you wanted to create your own custom confetti or custom shaker bits, this one is perfect for that. So I die cut those beads and I have them off screen. And off screen, I picked out which beads I wanted to use to have them ready rather than having you watch me going through the piles to find the letters. So I did the Live Life at the top. Because the In Color has the same number of letters as Live Life, I could tell exactly where to start with that sentiment. And then again, put a gold heart spacer bead between the words. Then I put a gold bead on the left side of the words as well as the right side, and then just kind of alternated some pink and pink sand and dahlia beads. These ones again are hearts as well. I wanted them to be different from the letter beads. I wanted the shape of them to be different. I chose hearts because I thought it worked well with the heart hands. Again, you can pick and choose whichever beads work for you, which ones you like. You're not going to see a lot of the gold cardstock behind the actual space where the beads are, but you do see it at either end of the little bracelets. And I'm using the bracelet that kind of has a little bit of a wave to it. There's another one in the pack that is just a straight line. You could use that one as well. I kind of thought the one with the wave to it kind of flowed a little bit better with the card that I was creating. To give those beads a little bit of extra shine, I'm putting a drop of glossy accents on top of it, and then I'm going to let it sit and dry. And typically I'll let these dry for at least a half an hour to an hour, depending on how much glossy accents I've put on there. I tend to err on the side of caution, mainly because I can get impatient, and I've ruined things several times by getting impatient and then touching my the area that I put the glossy accents on. An option for that would be to get a scrap piece of paper, put a little bit of glossy accents on that scrap piece of paper that is about the same size as the one you have on your card. So if you want to touch something to see if it's dry, you can touch that scrap, and you're not going to ruin anything if it's not quite dry yet. For my second card, I'm going to take the Bestie Sentiments press plate, and I'm not only going to use it to do a sentiment for the card, but I'm also going to use it to press into the background just for some pattern texture. So this is fairly similar to the Winter Rose Garden one that I did for the front, except for the fact that I did for the first card, except for the fact that I used a layer stencil to color it. This is just going to have a stamped sentiment. Now, I tried my best to only ink that sentiment, but I realized after pressing it through the machine that I did get a little bit of ink on some of the other areas. The hands are going to be covering most of that, so it's not really a huge deal. Before moving that press plate, I put a little bit of the Best Ever Craft tape underneath where the first area of it, underneath where it first was positioned, so I knew where to go down to, and then I pushed that down. That way I wasn't going to have some sentiments that were covering each other. I probably could have added just a tiny little bit more space, but that's okay. It looks totally fine for that background, and we're always our own worst critics, so I'm probably being a little bit more critical than I need to. For this card, I'm doing the same sizing as my first card. So my image or my pressed piece here is going to be 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And then my mat is going to be 5 1/4 by 4 inches. To add a little bit of color to that background, I'm just using the Kitsch Flamenco distress pad, and I'm using some ink blending with some large Spellbinders brushes. And then I'm going to use the Selvage Patina as well as the Evergreen Bow pad for the bottom. Now, the brush that I have for my greens, I often like to use it with bundled sage and peeled paint, and no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to get them off the brush completely. So I do get a little bit of those color tones in here. I don't think it ruins anything because I'm not really matching it to anything for this particular card, but just know that sometimes you can't get rid of all the color in your brushes, and that's okay. So with that background done, I just put that to the side. My mat for this one is going to be the black cardstock. I could use color as well, but I really like the black mat with the black sentiment as well as the black shadow around the hands. And then that Bestie or that Heart Hands die set also has its own tiny bracelets for those hands. So I am going to put that on this card. The beads that I created at the beginning of the video are a little bit too big for it. These are tiny bracelets, so the beads are smaller. You can't really use the larger beads for it. They just look out of proportion. But I am just going to do some solid color beads for this one. And to be honest, I didn't really think that needed the beads with the letters on it anyways, because we already have a sentiment on there. I didn't think it needed anything else for this particular card. So I created a bunch of the hands off screen. I had already assembled this one, or the first one, on screen anyway, so didn't need to see that same process again. It's basically the same process. I cut them out of Barely Peach cardstock and have the shadow in the black, and then glued all the pieces together. For the bracelets, I have the shadow in black as well. I have some brushed gold cardstock from that Treasured Gold cardstock pack that I'm going to put on that shadow. And then this one, like I said, the beads are smaller, so it does have its own die for some small beads. And I die cut those out of the pink sand and the Dahlia cardstock. I'm going to alternate them so that there's a gold bead from this first piece that I glued down, and then there'll be an alternating Dahlia and pink sand beads on there, just to give it a little bit of color variation. And I didn't want to completely cover up that gold die cut as well. I'm going to do the same thing on the second bracelet. Again, alternating between the gold beads so that you see them. I really like the touch of metallic accents with the regular cardstock. And again, I didn't want to cover that up completely. Now, I did glossy accents on the last beads to give them a little bit of extra shine. For this one, I'm going to put some stickles on there to give them some glitter. So we're going to have a colored glitter bead and then a gold bead beside it. I didn't put any stickles on the gold part, just the colored beads. But I did glue those onto the card first so that it was secure before I went and put the stickles on there. The stickles aren't going to take nearly as long to dry as that glossy accents did because there's less of an amount on there. But I love the little bit of sparkle that it adds there. And that's a really simple card, but I love the fact that those heart hands really highlight the sentiment in the center of that card. For my last card, I'm going to use those heart hands to create a shaker element for my card, and then I'm going to use the Bestie Beaded bracelets, those dies from there, to create the confetti to go in the shaker. So I have my hand silhouettes. I cut a piece of acetate that was 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Put those hands together so that they're just touching, not overlapping, and then glued that acetate there and set it aside to dry. And then I went to work using a bunch of my black cardstock scraps to die cut a bunch of hands. So it doesn't matter whether they're different types of black cardstock. I wanted to layer them together to create that shaker element. And because we're not going to actually see the different black tones, again, it doesn't matter if they're exactly the same or different. A lot of these pieces are some of the black cardstock that I use for the mats on my card. And that was from a pack of cardstock that isn't very thick. So it's only good for mats and for shadow for die cuts. I wouldn't use it for creating a card base because it's not thick enough for that. So in the end, I ended up using 9 layers of these hands to create enough dimension for my shaker element. That's really going to depend for you on how thick the cardstock you're die cutting is and how thick you want your shaker element to be. Neither is right or wrong. It's just personal preference. So I layered them all together, and I did a lot of this off screen so that it wouldn't be repetitive. And once my front of my shaker here is dry, I can cut that little V-notch out of the top. That's where some acetate was showing through. And then I can glue those hands onto the back. And these are the layered hands for my shaker element. This is why we didn't want to overlap the first hands, because if we overlapped the first set of hands on the front of that acetate, then this wouldn't line up correctly. By having them just touching, I can make sure that it's a shaker element that doesn't have any spaces for that confetti to fall out of, but we're not having overlapping, so everything is going to line up properly. While I'm waiting for the shaker element piece to dry on the back side of that acetate, I'm going to create some gold confetti. Now that specialty cardstock in the Treasured Gold pack is beautiful, but it's white on one side. And because I wanted to create confetti for my shaker element, I wanted it to be gold on both sides in case some of it flipped. So I'm using some of the limited edition Lisa Horton metallic ink pads. I'm using the solid gold one, and I put it on some hammermill cardstock, let one side dry, turned it over, and then put some on the back side of that and let that dry before doing my die cutting. I chose 4 different bead shapes for this one. I wanted some variety. So I have some of the hearts, some of the stars, the flowers, as well as the butterflies. And I love the variety of those as well. And then I also have those same variety in the pink beads as well, so that I'm going to have a variety of pink, light pink, and dark pink. So once the hands behind my acetate have completely dried, I can add that confetti that I just made to it. And then I'm going to glue on a piece of white cardstock that's 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches and let that completely dry. And I do let that dry with my acrylic block on there, making sure that that holds everything in place. And I can start working on my sentiment for this card. Now I want to create a sentiment that is embossed, and I will often do embossing with my press plates. But when it comes to sentiments, because some of the areas are so fine, sometimes it just doesn't create as good of a finish sometimes as a stamped and embossed sentiment. So this is one of the reasons why I love the fact that there's a choice between a press plate as well as a clear stamp. And I'm going to use one of those clear stamps to create my sentiment for this. Now I have 2 reasons that I want to do this. A, because I like the look of a stamped and embossed sentiment with a stamp when that's an option. B, I was curious if the die set from the press plate set was the same size. Like I was curious if the fonts were the same size for both sentiments. So I was curious if the die set from the press plate set was going to work with the stamps. And the cool thing is it absolutely does. So I used my MISTI stamping tool to hold that stamp in place and stamped it twice with Versamark ink and then put some gold embossing powder on there. And then I'm going to melt it with my heat tool. The one thing I realized I forgot to mention is because I hadn't used that stamp set before, I took a white eraser and I rubbed it on the stamping surface of the whole stamp set. This removes any manufacturing residue and it helps that stamp take ink a little bit better. Then I proceeded with the stamping and the embossing of my sentiment. And I do that for the whole set so that I know if I've ever done one or used one of the stamps from a set, I know the entire set is done. I don't have to remember what I have and haven't done. Then I grabbed the die set from the Bestie Sentiments press plate and die set and matched that sentiment up, taped it in place, and I'm going to run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine to die cut it. Now my piece of cardstock here is a little bit bigger, so I'm going to be cutting extra pieces because it's just one die that cuts a bunch of sentiments. Any of those extra pieces that are the full size of the sentiment that would have been on it, I'm going to keep that with that press plate set. I can use those to go behind other press plate sentiments in the future just to give them some extra dimension. There's no point in them going to waste. Any of the pieces that are half a sentiment or not complete die cuts of it, I'm just going to put them in my recycle bin. So with my shaker element done, I used those same small scissors just to cut that V out of the top of the hands, just where the white cardstock was exposed on the outside. And then I'm ready to start creating my background. So I have the Fresh Picked Floral Frames embossing folder. This one is part of the Woodland Tales collection from this month. And I thought it would be a nice background to go behind this card here. It's a beautiful frame and I absolutely love it. I love the fact that it has the flat area in the center. It's perfect for adding a sentiment or an image. I cut this down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and I'm also going to have a mat behind on my card that is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. Now, after doing this white background and cutting my pink mat, I started getting curious. I wondered if it was going to look better to have it in black, so I did that off screen. I knew I wanted to take that same gold ink pad that I'd used to create the confetti and do some light ink blending on my embossed background just to make that pop a little bit more and tie that gold in a little bit more. So I'm going to do it with both of these backgrounds so you can see what it looks like. I'll pick and choose which one I like best, and then the other one I'll just save for a future project. So I am doing some ink blending with that gold pad. Now that gold pad is very, very juicy, so I tapped my ink blending brush in my pad, then on my desk just to remove some of that ink. And then I start out with a very light hand on my embossed background and then slowly increase pressure as I get familiar with the ink amount that is on the brush. You could always add more ink, but once it's on that cardstock, you can't take it away. So best to be light-handed first and then increase the pressure or add more ink if you want a little bit more there. So I'm just doing it lightly on the raised surface. I'm not making sure to have my flowers completely covered. I just want to add a little bit of that gold sparkle to it and just highlight that background. So here it is on those two backgrounds. I ended up choosing the white one for this card, but the funny thing is, on screen as the video, I'm doing the voiceover, I'm starting to like the black side or the black background even more. So again, there's no right or wrong, it's personal preference, and sometimes that personal preference changes in time. So you can see what it looks like on those both of those backgrounds, and if you choose to create this card as well, you can pick and choose which background you prefer. So I glued down my pink mat onto my white card base and then my embossed and inked background. And then I can glue down my little shaker element here. I'm using that same liquid glue for all of it. Again, it gives you some wiggle room, and I love the fact that you do get that wiggle room. And I'm putting that acrylic block down in between just to hold everything down nice and flat. Then I'm going to glue that sentiment down, and I chose to glue that sentiment down on the flat area in the center of that embossed background, so it worked perfectly to have that flat area there. Here is the finished card. I absolutely love that those heart hand shaker elements with the embossed background. I love the fact that those shaker bits inside that shaker element were also created with the Bestie Beaded Bracelets die set, and I love the idea of being able to create your own custom confetti. Here is the second card with the sentiments pressed into the back to create just a little bit of subtle texture, and then our first card with the spotlight or the just one cluster of roses inked, as well as that beaded bracelet. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.